Okay. Hey ladies and gentlemen, this is Miss Hummer here, and today we're going to be doing Unit 6, Notes 1. So we're going to be talking about exponential functions. So today we want to be able to graph and interpret exponential functions. So let's start. So first let's talk about what an exponential function is. So an exponential function takes the form of y is equal to a to the x power. So now our variable is actually in the exponent. That's what makes an exponential function. This is going to be true when a is greater than 0, so we don't want a to be negative, and also a cannot be 1, because if we take 1 and we multiply it by itself, and we multiply and we multiply and we multiply, it's still going to be 1. Okay, so that's why we don't want it to be 1, and we also want it to be greater than 0. So those are the two things that make up exponential functions. So let's start by taking a look at this. So when we graph these, the best way to graph them is to just make a table. So typically we make a table of values. So let's start. And so the first thing I want to do is I'm going to figure out x values. So I usually do 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4 as my standard x values. And then I go ahead and I plug each of those values in for x. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do y and 4 to the 0 power. So how do you do that in your calculator? So you'll hit 4, and then there's a little button on your calculator that looks like this. It's called a caret key, and that's how you raise it to the exponent of 0. So you do 4 to the 0 power. And when you do that, remember back in Unit 3, anything to the 0 power is always 1. So then we're going to keep doing that. Then I'm going to do 4 to the first power, and that's going to go in the next spot. Well, 4 to the first power is just 4. And then 4 squared, which is going to give me 16. 4 to the third power, which is going to give me 64. And 4 to the fourth power, which is going to give me 256. So now I can go ahead and I can plot these points. So we're crossing the y-axis at 0, and then we're going over 1, up 4, over 2, up 16, which is here, and then the next one is going to be off the graph. So I want to make sure when I graph this that I don't cross that third line before I make it off the page, because 64 isn't on my graph. So I don't want to cross over 3 on the x-axis before I get to 64. So one thing that I want you to point out too, for right now, you never want to cross the x-axis. Okay, so think of that as kind of like a stopping point. We're going to kind of slope down to it, but we're never going to touch it. We're just going to kind of go down to it and then ride along, but we're never going to cross it. It's our kind of like our finish line. We're not going to go past it. And then your y-intercept always comes from when x is 0. So my y-intercept is 1. That always comes from when x is 0. So if it ever asks you what's the y-intercept, just plug in 0 for x. Let's take a look at this next one. So now we're going to graph 3 to the x power. So now again, I'm going to pick my values of 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4. So now I'm going to go ahead and plug that in for x. So I'm going to start and I'm going to do 3 to the 0 power. Well, anything to the 0 power is 1. 3 to the first power. Well, anything to the first power is just that's going to be 3. Then 3 squared is going to give me 9. And then I'm going to do 3 to the third. That's going to give me 27. 3 to the fourth. That's going to give me 81. So now I can go ahead and plot these points. So I'm going over 0, up 1, over 1, up 3, over 2, up 9, over 3, up 27. So again, 3 isn't quite on our graph. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to go up, but I'm not going to cross that 3 line on my graph because I don't quite make it. And then I have this on the bottom here. Again, I'm not crossing that x-axis. I'm just going to kind of sit down on it. I'm not going to actually cross it. My y-intercept is going to come from my x when my x is 0. So that's going to make this 1. All right, so let's take a look at number 3. So for number 3, it says 4 times 2 to the x power. Again, I'm still going to use those same values of x. And I'm going to plug it in really the same way. So I'm going to use 4 times 2 to the 0 power. And you can actually plug it into your calculator that way, or you can do it in steps. Well, 2 to the 0 power is 1. 1 times 4 is 4. So this is going to be 4. Then I'm going to do 4 times 2 to the first power. That's really just going to end up being 4 times 2, which is 8. And then I'm going to do 4 times 2 to the second power. Really important thing here is that you simplify this first. Order of operations says you need to deal with the exponents first. So you need to take that 2 to the second power and deal with that first. Well, 2 squared is 4. 4 times 4 is 16. Then we're going to do 4 times 2 to the third power. So now our numbers are getting really big. So if you wanted to, you could just plug it into your calculator as such, especially if you have a good scientific calculator. If you don't, maybe now's a good time to ask your parents to get one. Okay, they're only like $15. So this is going to give you 32. And then last but not least is 4 times 4, 2, should be a 2. 4 times 2 to the fourth power, and that's going to be 64. So now we can go ahead and grab that. All right, so then what we're going to do is we're going to go over 0, up 4, over 1, up 8, and then we're going to go over 2, up 16, which is here. So we're going to go steadily up, and again, I'm not going to cross 3 on my graph because 32 isn't there, and then we're going to be sloping down that way. So here our y-intercept is up a little higher. Remember, your y-intercept is when x is equal to 0. What you'll notice is that number multiplied out front is your y-intercept. Okay, so that number that's not being raised to the exponent that's being multiplied on the outside is your x-intercept. Or y-intercept, I'm sorry. So let's take a look at this one, 6 to the 1/3 power. Okay, so let's put in our values, 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4. And now we're going to go ahead and calculate this out. So I have 6 times 1/3 to the 0 power. Again, 1/3 to the 0 power is 1, so that's going to be 6. Now it's going to get kind of confusing with that fraction, so this one might be good where we just enter the whole thing in our calculators. So we do 6 times 1/3 and raise that to the first power, which is really going to be the same as 6 divided by 3, which is 2. Then we have 6 times 1/3 squared, which is really going to end up being 6 divided by 9. So that's going to give me 0.6 repeating, which I'm going to round to be 0.67. Then 6 times 1/3 to the third. I might suggest that you try calculating the rest of these on your own and make sure you're doing it right. If not, let's look at it. Let's see what you're punching wrong into your calculator. Here you get 0.22, here you get 0.07. So we're starting out at 6, so we're at 6 here. And then we're going over 1, up 2, which is here, over 3, up 0.22, so that's barely there. So here's where the tricky part comes in. Remember when I said you do not want to cross the x-axis? So what's going to happen is when your graph slopes down like this, and it's going to slope down when this number is less than 1, and when it slopes down like that, you want to come down and come down and come down, but you're never going to actually cross this axis right here. You're just going to kind of sit on top of it, as you can see my graph is doing here on number 4. So what's our y-intercept? Well, that's going to be when our x value is 0, so that's going to be 6. So now we're going to add a number at the end. So what does that number added at the end mean? That means instead of the x-axis being the line we can't cross, this is going to be the line we can't cross. So what I like to do is I like to draw a dashed line. So I found where y is equal to 3 and I drew a dashed line because I know I can't cross that dashed line there. Okay, so now let's go ahead and let's plug in our values. We have 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4. So we can plug in our values. Once you go ahead and do that on your own, make sure you can get it right. So 2 to the 0 power is 1, plus 3 is 4. 2 to the first power is 2, plus 3 is going to give me 5. And continuing to put that in our calculator with all the exponent, 2 squared plus 3 is 7, 2 cubed plus 3 is 11, and 2 to the 4th plus 3 is 19. So we can actually graph all of those points. So we're going over 0, up 4, which is here, over 1, up 5, which is here, over 2, up 7, which is here, over 3, up 11, which is here, and over 4, up 19, which is way up here. So now that we have our points, we can go ahead and connect it. Now remember down at the bottom there, hopefully you can connect your dots better than I can. You don't want to cross this line right here because that's our new line. That's what that plus 3 is telling us. It's giving us a new line that we can't cross. We basically took this and we moved it upwards on the x-axis. That's what that plus 3 did. Remember that your y-intercept comes when x is equal to 0. So your y-intercept then is 4. Next, let's take a look at number 6. So again, we want to use our values here. So I'm actually going to start, and we're going to do 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. So I notice that I have, this should be minus 1, because that's minus 1. So I notice that I have minus 1, so that means that this negative 1 right here is the new line you can't cross. So now it's shifted down 1. So I'm going to go ahead and I am going to plug in my x and y values. So when you plug in 0, you get 1. And go ahead and plug these in on your own. Make sure you're getting the answer that I am. Okay, so when you do that, you should end up getting negative 0.5 here, negative 0.75 here, negative 0.875. So what you'll notice is we're getting really, really close to that negative 1, but if you kept going with x and kept getting higher and higher and higher, you would never actually reach it. So you're going over 0, up 1, over 1, up 0, and then you're getting even smaller. Then you're going to negative 0.5 to negative 0.75. So you're really getting really close to that negative 1 line, but you're never actually going to cross that negative 1 line. I'm just going to be kind of sitting alongside of it. So remember that your y-intercept is when your x value is 0, so your y-intercept is 1. So that concludes this part of your note video. I'm going to have you guys do some of the practice in class tomorrow, so please make sure you bring headphones because you will be watching part of the video tomorrow, and remember to take your Schoology quiz. Thanks for listening.